Welcome to RUNTALK. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Karp. On today's show, we're going to talk about something that is pretty common among a lot of runners, and that is strength training. You hear a lot about strength training for distance running performance. Everything from stair raises to kettlebells, squats, and all these different kinds of exercises. And if you're like me, you may be wondering, does any of this stuff really work? Do you really need to strength train to be a better distance runner? And so today's show is all going to be about strength training for running performance and whether or not it helps, and if it helps, then how to do it correctly. And so this is an issue that you can look at from two different perspectives, and we're going to take some time here. We're going to look at it from both different perspectives. One is the physiological performance influencer perspective. What are the underlying physiological factors that influence performance? So we look at it from an exercise physiology standpoint. The other side, the other way you can look at this is from the research standpoint. What does the research show about strength training for distance running performance? So we're going to take some time today, and if you're just joining us, welcome to a Run Talk with Dr. Jason Karp. I'm your host. And so let's first talk about the physiological side of distance running performance. What are the key factors that influence performance, and does strength training fit into those factors? Does it influence those factors? And if so, how? So there are multiple factors, as you can imagine. Distance running is very complicated in all of the different things that affect how fast somebody runs a 5K or a marathon. And so what are the physiological factors that influence performance, and how does that relate to strength training? Primarily among the factors is you have the three major players that I've talked about many times. It's the acronym of my certification program, Revolution Running. It's running economy, VO2 max, and lactate threshold. And so let's first talk about the most popular one, the VO2 max. VO2 max is the maximum volume of oxygen that the muscles can consume per minute. And it is influenced by two major categories of factors. One is the heart and the ability for the heart to distribute blood to the working muscles. And the other factor is what's happening inside the muscles, the mitochondria in the muscles, the ability for the muscles to extract the oxygen being delivered to it and to use that oxygen to regenerate ATP for muscle contraction. And so the strength training will not help improve the VO2 max because it doesn't make the heart a better pump of blood. It doesn't make the heart better at its ability to deliver blood to the muscles. And it doesn't enhance the muscles' characteristics that enable it to use the available oxygen. It doesn't increase the amount of mitochondria or aerobic enzymes or all of the metabolic machinery that is responsible for using oxygen. And the reason why it doesn't do that is because by its very nature, strength training is anaerobic. And so it doesn't specifically target the muscle's ability to use oxygen nor the heart's ability to deliver the oxygen in the blood. Now let's look at one of the other factors, lactate threshold. You got the same issues. Lactate threshold is the fastest aerobic speed that is sustainable. And so it has more to do with what's going on inside the muscles than it has to do with the cardiac issues at VO2 max. It's very interesting, actually. We talked about this on another show, that the characteristics that are the biggest influencers of the VO2 max, which are cardiovascular, are different from the biggest factors that influence the lactate threshold, which are muscular. And so strength training doesn't have the ability to increase the lactate threshold, again, for the same reasons, because it doesn't improve or enhance the muscle's ability to use the available oxygen being delivered to it. Now let's get to the third physiological factor, which is the running economy. In this case, there's some differences, because running economy, which is the one physiological factor that science and research knows the least about. We know a ton about VO2 max. We know a ton about lactate threshold. We're still learning about what are the underlying things that influence the running economy, but we still know a lot. And like I talked about in the last episode, running economy is greatly influenced by the amount of running you do. People who run the most tend to be the most economical. And that has a lot to do with the continuous nature of running and the repetition of those running movements. Just like a child learning how to walk, you practice walking until it becomes smooth, and it's kind of the same idea with running. And so what is strength training? How can strength training improve economy? Well, the research shows, we're going to get to the research part of this in a minute, but the research shows that strength training can improve economy through a neural mechanism, not through a metabolic or cardiovascular mechanism, because there's a number of different things that influence economy. Economy is influenced by metabolic factors, what's going on inside the muscles, the capillarization, the mitochondria, the enzymes, and what's happening in metabolism, because economy is the amount of oxygen you consume to maintain a given submaximal pace. And so it's metabolic in nature. But strength training can improve running economy through a neural mechanism, because there's also a neuromuscular side to economy, the ability for your central nervous system to recruit motor units or muscle fibers for the act of running. And so running economy has both a metabolic nature and a metabolic influence, and as well as a neuromuscular influence. And so from the neural side, from the motor unit recruitment or muscle fiber recruitment side, strength training may help. There's a caveat to that, which we'll get to in a few minutes, about what kind of strength training to do to focus on the neural aspect of running, because most people who strength train do it wrong. They do these body weight exercises, and that's not good enough. That's not the strength training that runners really need to do, but we'll get to that. We've got to do a little bit of foreshadowing here. If you're just joining us, welcome to the new episode of RUNTALK. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Karp. On today's episode, we talk all about strength training and its ability or inability to make you a better runner. And so that's the scientific side. Then we also have the anaerobic metabolic side of running performance. If you're training for shorter races, like 5K and even shorter than 5K, then you really rely a lot on anaerobic metabolism. And power becomes a greater influence, the ability for the muscle to generate power against the ground. And so power is a component of two things. There are two components that make up power: strength and speed, or the technical term that we always learned in back in high school physics class: power equals force times velocity. So force, the amount of strength the muscle can produce, the amount of force the muscle can produce against the ground, and the speed or the velocity at which that force is produced. And so power equals force times velocity, or you could think of it as strength times speed. And so the shorter the race, the more important power becomes. If you look at sprinters are very powerful. They produce a lot of force, but more importantly, they produce that force very quickly against the ground. The further away you get from sprinting, like when you get to half marathon and especially marathon, power isn't as important as oxygen use and fuel use. One of the things that makes the marathon so unique is that you run out of fuel during the marathon. You run out of carbohydrate. And so strength training is very important for sprinting, because you want to add muscle mass, because larger muscles are stronger muscles, and you want to generate greater power. So for middle distance races, like 800 meters, 1500 meters, strength training can be very important, because even in those middle distance races, speed is very important. If you want to be a good miler, or especially if you want to be a good 800 meter runner, you have to have a lot of speed. And so you have to be able to generate a lot of power against the ground. And so strength training becomes more important for the shorter races, in which power is very important. For the longer distance races, power is not as important as other things. Metabolism is more important, and the ability to transport and utilize oxygen at very high rates and be able to sustain that at very high rates is very important. So that's the science side. That's the physiology side. When you ask yourself, should I strength train to improve my performance? First, look at the physiology. What are the limiting factors of the race that I'm training for? If I'm training for a mile, well, what limits the mile performance? Well, there's a lot of things. There's what we already talked about, the blood flow from the heart to the muscles ability to use the available oxygen in metabolism. And then you have acidosis, which is caused by the anaerobic side of metabolism. And so you need to buffer that acidosis. So ask yourself, well, what are the specific physiological factors that influence performance in the race that I'm training for? And then whether or not strength training will address those factors. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the marathon. What are the factors that influence marathon performance? Running out of glycogen. And so you ask yourself, well, is strength training going to pack more glycogen into the muscles? No, it's not. The ability for the heart to get blood flow and oxygen flow to the muscles. Is strength training going to improve that? Well, no, it's not. The muscle's ability to use the available oxygen. Is strength training going to improve that? Well, no, it's not. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what is the purpose of strength training? What does strength training do? And what it does, is that effect going to improve my ability to run faster? And that depends on the race. So you have to look at the physiology side first, and what are the causes of fatigue in the different races that you're training for, and then ask yourself, does strength training have the ability to address those specific factors? Then once you have that set, and that's a lot of work, but once you have that set, now we can look at this from the research side, because there's been plenty of research on strength training for distance running performance. And so what does the research say? Well, there's a lot of research on this. But to sum it all up, I've read every single study. I have talked about this at many coaching clinics around the country and around the world. I've written about it. So I know the literature review, I have it all in my head. And that's one thing I will urge you to do, is that when you ever want to know something, don't just look at one study, and don't cherry pick studies that support what you want to believe. That's how people on Facebook and Instagram, support. That's what they do. As a real scientist, as a real critical thinker, you have to look at the whole body of research. And when you have the whole body of research in your head, then you can make some kind of conclusions. If you know whose research you want, become familiar with the scientists who are studying what you want to know, and then make some conclusions and look at how they did their study, because the result of any study oftentimes is a result of how you set up the study. And so you have to look at the protocols that they use. If they did strength training, what kind of strength training did they do? What did their subjects do? How long was the protocol? You have to look at all of this stuff. And so when you research and when you review all the studies that have been done, you come up with some conclusions. So what the research shows is that strength training in the traditional sense that people do, a lot of distance runners tend to do programs that are more muscular endurance in nature, where they do a high volume of reps. They do a modest amount of weight and a high volume of reps, because that's what a lot of runners think that runners should do. It's an endurance sport. You train with endurance. So you do, 20 reps of each exercise. And especially the people who are doing body weight kinds of exercises in front of their camera, if they're following along a video or something, that a lot of people do, then that's the kind of stuff that they do. They'll do, 20 squat jumps and 20 jumping jacks and 20 burpees and all this stuff. That high volume approach doesn't work for distance running performance. The strength training that does work for distance running performance is very high intensity. So very close to what's called your RM, your repetition maximum. So the 1 RM, the 1 rep max, is the maximum amount of weight that you can lift one time. And so the research on strength training for distance running performance that shows that it's effective is a very high percentage of the 1 RM, over 85% of the 1 RM. So you're lifting more than 85% of the amount of weight that you could lift just once. So it's a very high intensity type of a strength training program. And the reason why that works is because of what I said before, that it focuses on economy. So strength training, no matter how you do it, let me backtrack for a second. Strength training, no matter how you do it, has not been shown to increase the VO2 max, and it does not increase the lactate threshold. But it can improve economy through focusing on a motor unit or muscle fiber recruitment, so the neural aspect of performance of running economy. And to do that, to focus on the neural aspect, you have to lift heavy, because you have to lift close to what you could possibly lift at your maximum. Because when you do that, you're recruiting a lot of muscle fibers for the task. If you lift only 70% of your 1 rep max, you would have to lift it many times to get even close to recruiting everything that you have in the muscle. If you lift very heavy, then you're forcing your central nervous system to recruit a lot of muscle fibers. Because the way we regulate force, if you're lifting a very heavy weight, the way we regulate force 2 different ways, which you can't control. It's the central nervous system does this. We regulate force by recruiting more muscle fibers and increasing the stimulation, the timing of that stimulation. So we send a signal to the muscle maybe once every half a millisecond instead of once every millisecond. And so we regulate force by recruiting more muscle fibers and increasing the frequency at which those muscle fibers are stimulated to be recruited. And so when you lift a very, very heavy weight, then you are doing both of those things simultaneously. You're recruiting a lot all at once, and you're increasing the frequency at which those muscle fibers are stimulated. So you produce a lot of force. And so that's the trick, that if you're going to strength train, then you have to lift very heavy weights. Having said that, you don't want to just go into a gym and start lifting 85, 90, 95% of your 1 rep max all by yourself. That's something that is it could be dangerous if you do it all by yourself, if you're not used to lifting that kind of heavy weight. So you have to have a spotter with you, because you don't want to have an accident and drop a weight on your foot or something like that. So you have to be very careful, because it is very heavy, very intense. And the reason why that kind of strength training works is because, remember what I said a few minutes ago, that power equals force times velocity. So if you want to focus on improving power, you have to focus on improving one or both of those two components of power, the force and the velocity. So very heavy strength training focuses on increasing the amount of force, because you're lifting very close to the amount of maximal force that you could lift just one time. Now, the other part of that equation is the velocity. The way we improve the velocity component of power is by producing quick force against the ground in a very, quick. So what do you think? I'm going to ask the Facebook and Instagram audience, what do you think kind of training will target the velocity component of power by producing a lot of force against the ground very quickly? Plyometrics, very good. My audience is so smart. Plyometrics. And so that's why plyometrics can be very beneficial, because any force that you're producing it against the force very quickly. You're landing and jumping off the ground very quickly, spending as little time on the ground as possible. That's very stressful for your calves. It's very stressful for your Achilles tendon. Like if you do hop jumps off of a set of bleachers or something. So with that too, you have to be very careful, because you don't want to damage your Achilles tendon and get some tendonitis. So you have to precede the plyometrics or the very heavy strength training with some other kind of strength base to begin with, because you can't just jump in to doing very heavy strength training or the aggressive plyometrics, because you don't want to get injured. And especially with plyometrics, that can lead to Achilles tendonitis and calf issues. And so you have to be careful. When you start it, don't start with 10 exercises. Start with maybe 1 or 2 exercises and just introduce the stress. This goes all back to the whole theory of training and how you apply a little bit of a stress, the body responds and adapts to that stress, and then over time you can apply a little bit greater stress, a little bit greater stress, a little bit greater stress. But you have to be methodical in how you do that. On another episode, we'll talk about the whole training process and how to design the training program. And that gets into the book I'm writing right now on periodization for running and why you do things a certain way. But that's a whole other episode. So suffice it here to say that, so from the research side of things, strength training can help, but only if you do it a specific way. Only if you train with either very heavy weights to focus on the force component of power, or if you do it with plyometrics that focus on the velocity or speed component of power. Now, having said all of that, I'm going to say that if you're going to strength train, there has to be a reason for it. And if you have not yet maximized the run training, there's no reason to strength train. Because if you're going to strength train, you don't want it to detract from the type of training that has greater direct influence on your running performance. Most runners would much more benefit by focusing on the cardiovascular and metabolic factors that influence performance before going to do strength training. We all have only a certain number of hours per day or a certain number of minutes per day to devote to our training plan. We're not professional runners where we all have unlimited amount of time, where we can run 100 miles a week and we can strength train and we can take naps. Most people can't do that. And so you have to ask yourself, in the 1 hour I have every day, or in the 45 minutes I have every day, what is going to give me the greatest return on my investment? And the answer, in 99% of cases, is that what is going to give you the greatest return on your investment is focusing on your run training, either running more volume or more intensity or more volume of intensity, which kind of gets neglected a lot, but that's very important. And so, if you're only running 20 miles a week right now, that's great. But do you run 20 miles a week and then strength train? Or do you go from 20 miles a week to 30 miles a week and use that time to add another 10 miles more per week? Which is going to have the more direct impact on your running performance? Well, I hope you say that going from 20 miles a week to 30 miles a week, or from 30 to 40, or from 40 to 50, that's going to have a much more direct impact on your 5K performance or your half marathon performance, and certainly on your marathon performance, rather than stay at 20 miles a week and use the time, the extra time that you have, to strength train. And so you have to ask yourself, where is your time best well spent? Because how much you run has the greatest impact on your running performance. Even people who race 800 meters at the elite level are still running 60, 70, 80 miles a week, even though their race takes 2 minutes to run, or less than 2 minutes to run. And so you have to ask yourself, well, where, in the time that I have, what's going to give me the biggest bang for my buck? Where is my time best well spent? If you have already maximized your run training and you can't run anymore, if you're running 80, 90, 100 miles a week and you can't physically run anymore, then I would say if you still have the time and you still have the energy to try to squeeze out more out of yourself, then you can try to do some specific strength training. The other issue is how much can you continue to adapt to. We all have our point at which we're going to stop adapting. What makes Olympians is that they can run upwards of 100 miles a week, and number one, not only do they not get injured out of it, but they also continue to make physiological adaptations. They have very responsive DNA. And so they can run until their heart's content, and they keep adapting, they keep growing as a runner, they keep getting better. Most people can't do that. Most people will stop adapting at some much lower level of mileage. And so maybe 40 miles a week is as much as you will adapt to. Then why do 50? Then you're not, you're just running for the sake of running. If you're not getting better, then why do it? Unless you just happen to really like running. You just want to keep running, even if you're not getting better doing it. But assuming that you want to get better doing it, if 30 miles a week or 40 miles a week is as much as you will physiologically adapt to, then I would say if you still have the time, and you still have the energy, and you still want to see how good you can be, then you can add in some specific strength training. And then the other issue, which I just mentioned, is injury. If running more than 30 miles a week makes you injured, well, then don't run more than 30 miles a week. Then you can supplement your 30 miles a week with some strength training. But I would first focus on the run training. Now, having said all of that, there's a lot of layers to this, as you can imagine. There's a lot of ways of looking at the strength training issue. You can't just, follow what the guidelines or what people on Facebook and Instagram give you. There's a lot of things going on right now, especially with, gyms being closed and everything. There's a lot going on with people filming videos and then broadcasting it to the world, and they have all this strength training for runner stuff, and you look at what they're doing and you think, well, that's not going to help you be a better runner. And I told you all the way back on the very first episode of this that you're going to get things from this show that you're not going to get from other people. And so I hope that you come in and listen every week, because I'm not going to be politically correct here. I'll tell you that other people are doing things that are wrong, and I will point that out, and I'll show you, well, what's the right way to do it. And if I don't know something, if you ask me a question, I don't know it, I will tell you I don't know it, but I'll go find the answer. I learned that pretty quick a long time ago, that if you don't know something, that it's okay to say you don't know. But this is an area in which I do know a heck of a lot about, because I've been engaged in this for a very long time, and I have read probably every single study that's ever been done on this issue, and I've written about it and spoken about it, and so that's why I want to share it with you guys. And so the other way to look at this is if I'm going to strength train, what kind of strength training do I do? So we already covered the heavy strength training, the plyometrics. But before you even do any of that, the most specific kind of strength training for running is probably hill training. So running up a hill, doing bounding drills up a hill. So you can do like plyometric types of activities up a pretty steep hill, where you're on one leg at a time and you're doing all kinds of hops and bounds up the hill. That stuff is very beneficial, can be very beneficial for running performance. I would do that kind of stuff first before you go into a gym or before you go into your living room and do burpees and squat jumps and lunges and that kind of stuff. That stuff has very limited, if any, effect on your distance running performance. You can do burpees all day long. It's not going to help you hold a faster pace in a marathon, because what's going to help you hold a faster pace in a marathon is the ability for your muscles to use the oxygen being delivered to it and sustain a high fraction of your lactate threshold and sustain a high fraction of the VO2 max. And that has nothing to do with burpees and lunges and those kinds of things. It has to do with what's going on metabolically inside of your muscles. And doing the burpees and lunges and then the squat jumps and that kind of stuff is not going to improve the muscle mitochondria. It's not going to improve the ability for the mitochondria to utilize oxygen at a high rate and to be able to sustain that. And so you have to look at the specificity of training principle and what is going to have a more direct impact on my running performance. And so doing things like everything that you do is on one leg at a time, because you're running, you're producing force against the ground at one leg at a time. And so doing squats or burpees or anything like that, I keep coming back to the burpees, I don't know why, it's off the top of my head. But doing things like that where you're on two legs at a time, well, obviously the stronger leg is always going to compensate for the weaker leg. And so anything you do should be on one leg at a time, because that's how you produce force against the ground when you're running. And so doing bounding drills up a hill, or even doing short hill sprints, that kind of stuff can be valuable, much more valuable than going into a gym and doing the traditional kinds of strength exercises. And certainly you don't want to do things that are open, what are called open chain, like a leg extension machine. Any kinds of strength training that you do for running performance should be closed chain, where your foot is in contact with the ground, because that's what more closely mimics the running motion, the running performance, is producing force against the ground. So getting on a leg extension machine and doing leg extension, that's not going to help you become a better runner. And so any strength training that you do, like the traditional kinds of lifting, even that should try to be made as specific to running as possible. But first I would do things like bounding drills up a hill. Hill training is very good for running, because you're actually doing the running motion while you're trying to improve power against the ground. So there's many ways now. In the half an hour that I've been talking, there's a lot of different ways we've looked at this. First is the scientific physiological way. What are the factors? And I know I repeat myself because people come in at different times. And I know when this gets saved, people may not watch the entire show. They may not watch the entire video. So I'll repeat things to sum up. So one way to look at it, the first way to look at it, is what's the underlying physiology of the race that I'm training for? What are the physiological factors that influence running performance? And how do I target those factors? And whether or not strength training will be able to target those factors. Then the other side of this is the research side. What does the research show that strength training does or does not help running performance? And we already covered that. That the research that does support, there is some research to support that strength training can improve running performance, but really there's actually only a couple of studies that looked at performance, so you can't even really say that. What the research shows is that strength training can improve running economy. It does not improve VO2 max, it does not improve lactate threshold, but it can improve running economy through a neural mechanism. Now keep in mind, like I said earlier, there are other things that affect economy. The neural side of this, the ability to recruit muscle fibers synchronously for the job, that has been shown to be able to be enhanced through heavy strength training. And so if you're going to strength training, first maximize the run training, and then if you've already maximized your running volume, if you've already maximized the tempo runs and the interval workouts, and you can't do any more of that you've already maximized all the run training, the volume and intensity, and the volume of intensity, If you have already maximized all of that, then you can try some very specific strength training where you lift heavy and you do plyometrics, and then that gives you the complete training program. But I wouldn't do that until you have already maximized the run training. There's actually very little research to show that strength training, even of the heavy type, actually improves running performance. Now, the other issue of this, which we haven't mentioned yet, but that's why we have a whole show on this, is injury prevention. A lot of people talk about strength training to prevent injuries. And again, you have to ask yourself, well, what is the specific reason why a runner is getting injured? What is it that they're doing in training? What is it that they're doing that is causing the injury? And what type of injury is it? And then ask yourself, is strength training something that can prevent that? So you have to think like a scientist. You don't just listen to the people on Instagram and Facebook that, put out their videos and say, oh yeah, and their blogs, you see this a lot in blogs, you have to strength train because it prevents injuries. Well, you go and show me the research that shows that strength training, especially the typical way that people do it with the body weight exercises, that is going to prevent running related injuries. It does not. Doing burpees and squat jumps and lunges and push-ups, that stuff does not prevent the reason why people get injured from running. When you look at things like Achilles tendonitis and stress fractures and IT band syndrome, those things don't happen because the person is not strong enough. That doesn't happen because the muscles are weak. And so the strength training is not going to prevent the runner from getting injured by doing those things. Okay, I'm trying to read some of the comments. Well, I'll get to the comments in a minute, any questions you have. Let me just talk through this and then we'll get to the questions. And so, if you're going to strength train, it has to be heavy strength, because even if you're going to try to strength train to prevent injuries, it's the same concept. You have to lift heavy, because think about what happens when you're lifting heavy. You're making the muscle stronger. Doing stuff like body weight exercise, that doesn't improve the strength of a muscle. The strength of a muscle is defined by what's the maximum amount of force the muscle can produce. That's muscle strength. That's how you define muscular strength. The maximum amount of force that the muscle can produce. And very heavy strength training can enhance the maximum force a muscle can produce, and that's how it enhances power. Heavy strength training has also been shown to improve bone mineral density. So if you want to improve, like stress fractures is a common type of injury that runners get. If you want to prevent a stress fracture, then you have to make the bone more dense. In order to make the bone more dense, you also have to lift very heavy. Because when you lift very heavy, you have a lot of force on the muscle, tugging at the bone. That's how we move. Muscles tug on bones. They're connected to the bone via a tendon. So the muscle, with a very strong contraction, if you can imagine, you can visualize this, a very strong contraction really tugs on that tendon to force the bone to move. And so that's why very heavy strength training has been shown to increase bone mineral density. And so you could argue then that to prevent a stress fracture, you can make the bone more dense by enhancing by doing the very heavy strength training. But again, there's other more specific things to running that you can do before you go into a gym and do that kind of stuff. So there's very limited, if any, evidence that strength training will prevent injuries, that the typical kinds of injuries that runners get. When it comes to something like IT band syndrome, there is some evidence that there is a relationship, that people who get things like IT band syndrome do tend to have weak hip muscles. However, there is no cause and effect relationship that has been shown by the research. The research has not elucidated that weak hip muscles are the cause of IT band syndrome. But people who have IT band syndrome do tend to have weak hips, weak glutes, and so there's a relationship there, but research has not shown that there is a cause and effect relationship there, that weak hips, weak glutes do not cause an injury like IT band syndrome or any other kind of injury. And so while people who get injured do tend to be weak, especially in their hip region, their core region, the lower back muscles, the glutes, the hips, but it's not, that weakness is not what's causing the injury. There's something about the repetitive nature of running that is causing the injury, whether it's related to their biomechanics or most injuries are caused by increasing the volume or intensity too quickly for the body to adapt, and then some vulnerable body part breaks down. That's the main reason why people get injured, because this is a sport in which we evolved for. Running is so natural to who we are, and so why would we have evolved to do something that injures us? That's not the way evolution works, right? And so running in and of itself is not dangerous for you. But most people, they get overly aggressive and they increase the volume or intensity too quickly, and then some vulnerable body part may get injured. But doing strength training is not going to prevent that injury, especially the kind of strength training that you see broadcast all over social media and online with articles. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I saw an article that said that you should strength train to prevent running injuries, and then they show exercises like squat jumps and burpees and lunges and all these things, I'd be able to pay off my very large student loan debt if I had $1 for every article I saw that said that. And so if you're going to strength training, it has to be done in a very particular way with very heavy strength training or plyometrics, and even that should be saved for later. Do the more specific running training first, and you can do even more specific kind of strength training, like go into a steep hill, find a grass steep hill somewhere, and do kinds of strength training activities on that hill. You can do sprints up the hill, you can do bounding exercises up the hill, you can do springing types of things up the hill where you're really focused on the lower leg musculature and the Achilles tendon, and focus on generating power up the hill. And so that's a very brief summary of strength training for distance running performance. But I think I did a pretty thorough job with that, because there's a lot of different ways to look at this. So let me see if we can get into some questions here. One person asked, incorporate simple bodyweight exercise after runs periodically. And again, I would ask why. I mean, running itself is already a bodyweight exercise. Every time you land on the ground with each leg, you're putting 2 to 3 times your body weight on each leg. So what's body weight squats? What is that going to do over and above what you're already getting from your running? If you go on a 5-mile run, that's thousands of steps just on an easy 5-mile run. And then if you do faster running, where you're generating more force and more power, you're putting even more stress on the legs, and you're already getting a lot of that from running. And so the body weight exercises, getting on the ground and doing glute bridges where you raise your hips up in the air, how is that going to improve your running performance? I mean, I look at the crazy stuff that people do on social media, and it's hard not to sit and think, how is doing a plank or how is doing glute bridges going to help you, hold a faster pace in a marathon? How is that going to help prevent a running-related injury? It's not. But yet people broadcast this stuff because they don't know the physiology, they don't know the research, and so I urge you to educate yourself. Read all of the research. Get online, you go on Google Scholar or go on PubMed, type in keywords, strength training and distance running, or plyometrics and distance running. Type in keywords and a whole list of articles will come up, and go spend the next year of your life reading and reading and reading and reading and reading, and read all of this stuff and educate yourself and get to know the researchers who do this kind of work, and email them and have a conversation with them. Talk to the people who are in the laboratory who are doing this research, who've spent the last 20 years researching this stuff, and really immerse yourself in it. I support going back to school and getting degrees, but not everybody has to do that. But there are other ways to do it these days. You can read all these research, you can email these scientists all over the world who study this stuff, and get into a discourse with them and say, hey, I'm a runner, I want to improve my performance, I read your research, what do you think about this? Scientists love to talk about their research. You can email me anytime you want, jason@run-fits.com. Email me whatever time you want. I'll have a discussion with you about this. I love talking about this stuff. But the thing with strength training is that people think it's an elixir. 30 years ago, people were not, strength training for distance running performance is a fairly new concept. 30 years ago, nobody was doing this. Yet people were not getting injured back then. They were running faster back then. We had much faster marathoners in the 1970s and 80s than we have now. Now, we're lucky if we can get a few guys under 2:10 in the marathon. Back in the 1980s, we had a lot of guys who could run under 2:10 in the marathon. So, people are actually getting slower nowadays because the whole population is now running, which is great. But more injuries are happening now because people are getting off their couch and going to run a marathon. instead of evolving into the marathon with years and years of running. And so more injuries are happening right now, and people are running slower than they used to. And so it's interesting to me that even with strength training, it's not making anybody faster. I mean, look at the data. I mean, no one's getting faster from the strength training, especially the kind of strength training that they do. And so it's a very interesting conversation that, strength training is a fairly new concept for distance running performance. People never used to strength train, yet they were not being hurt by not doing it. They were just running all the time. If you're running 80 miles a week, you're going to be exhausted. How are you going to have the time and the energy to strength train? So again, you have to ask yourself, well, what's going to give me the biggest bang for my buck? What am I going to get the greatest return on my investment? And are there more specific running-related things I can do to enhance my performance and to prevent injuries and all that other stuff? All right, let's get some more questions. I'm going back here between Facebook and Instagram. I'm on both platforms, so I will try to get to as many questions as I can. See, we do see a lot of weakness like that. So Annalise asked, we do see a lot of weakness like that in our PT clinic from IT bands, ankles, hamstring. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of weakness in the general population. But again, I would ask, what can I do that is more running specific that is going to enhance performance rather than going into a gym and doing the stereotypical isolated exercises? Some people may need to do that. If you are so weak that any amount of running gets you injured, then there may be some isolated strength training exercises you'll have to do as a bridge to the other stuff. But there's always more running, specific kinds of things you can do. You can even do walking lunges up a hill. It doesn't even have to be the aggressive bound. You can start with walking lunges up a hill. That is much more specific than doing, glute bridges or something like that. Hill running or hill bounding is very good for the glutes. It's very good for the hips as well as for the calves and the Achilles tendon. So I'd always say to try to make the exercises as specific to the activity that you're training for as possible. Getting on your back on the ground and doing glute bridges, that's not going to help. That's not going to help prevent a running-related injury because you're not stressing the muscles and the joints the way you do when you run. And so it's not going to prevent a running-related injury, and it's certainly not going to improve running performance. You have to always remember the neuromuscular aspect. Now, that gets forgotten a lot. But you always have to remember the neuromuscular aspect of running performance. If you want to be a better runner, you got to run. If you want to prevent injuries for running, you have to prevent it in the context of running. How is running applying the stress, and what can you do to mitigate that stress or to adapt to that stress so that you don't get injured from the running movement? You always have to keep that at the forefront of your mind. Okay, let's get to some other questions. Does all this also apply to sprinting? Would plyometric bodyweight exercise be a good idea to increase tendon sprint strength? Yeah, so we talked about that earlier. So yes, for sprinting is a whole other animal, and that's a whole other sport. You want to do a lot of strength training for sprinting, and plyometrics is very important for sprinting because sprinting itself is a plyometric activity. If you watch sprinters, how quickly are they on the ground? Their foot is on the ground for such a small fraction of a second. And so that's the whole goal of sprinting. You want to be able to produce as much force as possible, as quickly as possible. And that gets us into the whole purpose of plyometrics. The whole purpose of plyometrics is to improve power of the muscles and tendon unit by spending as little time on the ground as possible and trying to produce as much force on the ground as quickly as possible. Remember, power equals force times velocity. And so plyometrics gets into the velocity component of power. That also gets us into another subject of physics that you may have learned in high school physics class or college physics class, impulse. Impulse is force times time. And so for sprinting, you want to focus on impulse, being able to produce force in a given amount of time. And so yes, to answer your question, plyometrics and heavy strength training is very important for sprinting. Not as much important for distance running, and the longer the race, the less important it becomes, because the longer the race, the less important power becomes against the ground, and the more important other things are, like metabolism and glycogen use and conserving glycogen and getting the muscles to rely on fat to conserve the limited stored glycogen. Those things become much more important for long distance running performance like the marathon. Any other questions here we get? Yeah, strength training for injury prevention. So thanks, Daniel. So we just covered that. That again, it has limited ability to prevent injuries from running related injuries. Strength training has limited ability to do that. And again, if you're going to try to use strength training to reduce the risk of injuries from running, it has to be specific to how the stress is applied from running. You could do let's get an example. You could do leg presses in a gym to strengthen the quadriceps and your hips, right? That's a great exercise. You go into a gym, you do leg presses against the thing. Great. You can really make your quads and your hips pretty strong. But then you go outside and run, and now you're applying force in a very different mechanical way. And so you're still subject to running-related injuries because you have not strengthened the joints and the muscles in the same way at which force is applied when you run. When you look at running and how injuries occur, you're talking about a modest level of force repeated many, many times. Injuries can happen two major ways. From trauma, from a great amount of force, like a football player when they get tackled, from a great amount of force, if you fall down, you fall down when you run. That's a great amount of force applied very quickly. That's one way to get injured. That's not usually the way runners get injured unless they fall. The main way that runners get injured is from a small amount of force repeated many, 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 many times. And so if you're going to strength train to reduce the risk of injury, you have to look at how injuries are occurring from running and try to strength train in that way. And that's why the kind of strength training that runners do really has very limited ability to reduce running-related injuries, because you're not applying the force in the same way when you strength train, and you're certainly not strengthening the tendons and the whole joint. You might be focused on the muscle, but most runners, they get joint-related injuries. You get Achilles tendonitis, or you have knee issues, patellofemoral pain syndrome. It's usually a joint injury. And so going into the gym and doing the traditional kinds of strength training, that doesn't address the integrity of the joint in the same way that you would get the stress from running. Okay, let's get to some more questions. So if you have any other kinds of questions, Jenna says, one of my favorite quotes comes from Malcolm Gladwell: runners secretly disdain any activity that's not running. I talk a lot about that in the book The Inner Runner, where I talk about how runners tend to be very pure animals. We look at running as a very pure activity, and we do. You're right, Jenna. Runners do disdain any activity that's not running, because we think that in running we found some kind of panacea, that running is the cure to all of our problems. And it is, in a sense, because that is the one thing that we evolved for. We evolved to run. So running is very natural. It's very primal to who we are. But having said that, there are some things that strength training may be able to address, but you have to be very specific to the running movement, to the neuromuscular aspect of running. Okay. And so let's see, she asked a lot here. I also find runners with injuries tend to have weak glutes. Yeah, so we talked about that already too, that certain kinds of injuries, the research has shown that there is some association between the weak glutes and hips and certain injuries like IT band syndrome, but not cause and effect. And so if you have weak hips and glutes, it doesn't cause you to get IT band syndrome or other kinds of injuries. And certainly, something like Achilles tendonitis or plantar fasciitis, those things are not because of weak hips and glutes. There's something else going on at the level of the foot, and what happens to the foot when it lands on the ground, and how the ground reaction force is applied back to the foot, and what's going up the whole kinetic chain. It starts at the foot. And so, some things may start, the ability to place your foot on the ground may start other areas. The ability to control how your foot is being placed on the ground can start higher up. But the weak hips and glutes is not causing you to get Achilles tendonitis. It's not causing you to get patellofemoral pain syndrome. It's not causing a stress fracture. Those things are caused by other things that are not related to weak hips and glutes. So while there is an association there related to some kinds of injuries, there's not a cause and effect there. This whole thing, hopefully you can understand, from all that I've been talking about, this whole thing about strength training, preventing running injury, the whole thing is overblown. The same thing with improving running performance. while strength training, I will say that while strength training, if done in a particular way, can help running performance, it may help specific running injuries if you do it correctly, if you do the strength training correctly. It is way overblown if you look at what people on social media say and what you see in articles online. I mean, always go back to who's writing the article or who's the voice on social media. I mean, that would be always the thing I would say. I mean, which this goes back to a whole other. We're going to talk about this on another episode. But would you take legal advice from someone who didn't go to law school? If somebody made a video giving legal advice and the person was not a lawyer who went to law school, would you take any stock? Would you put any stock into what they're telling you? Of course not. If someone is giving you medical advice who did not go to medical school, would you put any credibility in what they're telling you? Of course not. If you had someone going on a video and giving you accounting advice, how to do your taxes, would you take that advice if the person wasn't an accountant, or if the person wasn't a CPA and had gone to school for accounting? Of course not. So don't do the same thing with running advice. If the person doesn't have the credibility, their advice is meaningless. Go to somebody who's got the credibility, just like you would for any other profession. You wouldn't go to a psychologist to get advice on how to solve your problems if that person didn't have a degree in psychology. Psychologists have PhDs in psychology. Other therapists have master's degrees in the specific area that they're working in, whether it's social work or psychology. So just be careful as to who you're taking the advice from. And that's why I said that I'm not going to be politically correct on Run Talk with Dr. Jason Karp. I'm going to shoot straight with you, and I'm going to tell you, well, who do you listen to and who do you not listen to? And then I'll back that up. I said, well, listen to me, because you see those 3 diplomas on the wall back there? There's a lot of debt that is responsible for all that. There's many, many, many years of school and a lot of intense study and being in the laboratory and seeing this stuff for myself, and then coaching for over 25 years. I've been coaching since I was 24 years old. I was a head college coach. I'll pat myself on the back for that one. I was a head college coach when I was 24 years old, the youngest head college coach in America. I'm very proud of that. I've devoted my entire life to the study of this. I don't know anything else. Don't ask me about law. Don't ask me about economics. Don't ask me about, don't ask me about anything. Don't ask me about politics. Don't ask me about accounting. I know nothing about that. But this is something, running is something I know. And so on Run Talk with Dr. Jason, you're going to get what I believe is to be the very best advice based on the science, based on the research. So any other questions? Let's ask some questions. You're much more entertaining than reading scholarly articles. Thanks, Rick. I appreciate that. I try to be entertaining. I know it's weird talking to a video. I much rather do this live. When we're all able to get back live, please come to my certification course or come hear me speak at a conference, because I absolutely love talking live. It's like a drug for me. I absolutely love talking live and sharing what I know and sharing my passion with the audience. So when we're allowed to get back together in person, please join me and come to the events that I'm speaking at. One by one, these conferences the rest of the year are getting canceled. Now I only have 2 things left on the schedule. I hope they don't get canceled. One is my TED Talk in October in Rexburg, Idaho, and the U.S. All-Star Track and Field and Cross-Country Coaches Clinic in Atlantic City, New Jersey in early December. And right now, those are both still on the calendar. So hopefully they won't get canceled. So come to Rexburg, Idaho to hear me give a TED Talk in October, or come to Atlantic City, New Jersey. Great place right on the real board. They have real boardwalks there with the real wood. It's a beautiful place. A hotel right on the boardwalk. We'll go for a run together on the boardwalk, and then you can come hear me speak at the U.S. All-Star Track and Field and Cross Country Coaches Clinic in Atlantic City, New Jersey in the first week of December. So I'm looking forward to those things. Let's see, any other questions? Jen Zerling. Hi, Jen. How does a pregnant woman who wants to run avoid sciatica, since the ability puts strain on the lower back? Hi, by the way. Yeah, it's a very good question. So this is one of the things that I don't know a lot about. I know about piriformis syndrome and how the piriformis muscle can press on the sciatic nerve, but then to complicate that with pregnancy and how your center of gravity is moved more forward, that's something that I don't know. I would have to look at the research specifically on sciatica and pregnancy and running. And so maybe go on Google Scholar or go on PubMed and type in those things, sciatica, pregnancy, running, and see what comes up, because issues are different for pregnant women. In my book Running for Women, there's a whole chapter on pregnancy, but I don't talk about that. I don't talk about specifically sciatica. I do talk about how the center of gravity is moved slightly forward, so that affects the running mechanics. But I don't know what you can do as far as trying to get rid of the sciatica. Again, it's the same issue as getting the, whatever's pressing on that nerve, whether it's the piriformis muscle or something else, somehow you have to get the pressure off the nerve. And so I don't know how that is done in the complicated pregnancy situation compared to when somebody is not pregnant. So you stumped me, Jen, but I could do some research and look that up to see how pregnancy complicates the sciatica. And she says, well, then look it up. Yeah, I will, Jen. So you gave me some homework to do. Or maybe in the next edition, if I have a second edition of the book Running for Women, I'll have to research that and put that in there. Rick says relationships with a question mark. I'm not sure what he's asking. Relationships between injuries, between his strength training and injury. I'm not sure. Relationships between what and what. If you're more clear about that. Let's see. Any other questions? Or let's get to some of the Instagram questions. We've got some questions. Do you recommend swimming to increase VO2 max? That's a very good question. So that gets into the whole cross-train. We're going to have to cut this short. I know Instagram will cut me off in an hour. We got 4 minutes left. So you can cross-train to do other things to improve the VO2 max, but it won't improve it specifically for running because swimming is very, very different. When you're swimming, you're prone, and so that affects stroke volume and cardiac output. With running, stroke volume, the blood flow has to go against, the venous return has to go against gravity, whereas swimming, you're horizontal. And so you don't have to go, the blood flow doesn't have to go against gravity to return back to the heart. So there's all kinds of different things that affect VO2 max with cycling and with swimming compared to running. So to affect the VO2 max or lactate threshold with running, you have to do it by running. But if you're not running a lot yet, then sure, you can supplement with cross-training because all that stuff will help your overall general fitness. So I do have to cut it off here now. We could talk about this all day long, but I don't want to get cut off on Instagram. And I also want to, end the show in an hour. Even television shows don't last longer than an hour. But this has been a good talk. Any questions that I haven't gotten to live, I will try to answer in the comments. And so, every time I finish off this show with a thought. And so my thought today is that, this is for the runners who are scared about running. Every time I want to address a different, audience with the comments. And so don't ever be scared about, running is so natural and so primal to who we are that, don't ever be scared about running. Running is a great way to explore your environment. And so use running as a way to explore your neighborhood or explore the town in which you live, or when you travel again to explore. Running is a great way. Every time I go someplace, I go out of the hotel, I don't know where I'm going, but I just run. And it's a great way to explore my outside environment and my inner self in the context of that outside environment. And so don't ever be afraid to go out into a strange place and run, because it's such a great way to explore your external and internal environments. So thank you for joining another episode. Come back next Monday for another episode of Run Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Karp. See you next time.